Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 8 Part 59 based on novel. So let's start. Light rays poured down from the enormous formation in the sky, like a prison of light that trapped all the Yuan Gate disciples inside it. At this time, Lin Dong's crazy actions were already all too clear. He did not intend to let off even a single Yuan Gate disciple present. By the time everyone understood this point, even the other 8 great super sect disciples could not help but gasp in their hearts. The faces of the top disciples from every faction even turned faintly pale. Clearly, they were greatly frightened by Lin Dong's insane actions. Although there were ultimately some deaths and injuries in previous great sect competitions, no one had truly thought of completely exterminating another party. Even Ju Tong had only killed 100 Yuan Gate disciples, as well as the little Yuan King of that competition. Yet, Lin Dong was currently attempting to completely exterminate every single Yuan Gate disciple. This ruthlessness was sufficient to make one's hair stand on ends. Lunatic, this lunatic, if he really kills all the Yuan Gate disciples, Yuan Gate would likely go crazy, Wu Kun muttered with a pale face. The number of Dao sect disciples who have died at the Yuan Gate's hands are not few in number, Su Ruo bit her lips and said. Earlier, she had witnessed just how desperate the Dao sect had been forced to become. Moreover, she knew that Lin Dong valued relationships. Given his character, he would definitely go completely crazy with rage when he saw the deaths and injuries of the Dao sect disciples. The tactics of Lin Dong when he was crazy with rage clearly caused even one's soul to tremble. Wu Kun was speechless. Soon after, he let out a sigh. The enmity between both parties could no longer be reconciled. The Yuan Gate disciples had planned on humiliating the Dao sect since the beginning. However, they never imagined that there was a murderous god like Lin Dong in the current batch of Dao sect disciples. The various sects cannot pursue anything done during the great sect competition. However, if Lin Dong really does as he intends, the relationship between Dao sect and Yuan Gate will freeze completely. Ling Qingzhu softly stated. Many Dao sect disciples had died at the Yuan Gate's hands in past great sect competitions. It was not that these debts would not be paid, but that the time was not ripe. Now, however, it is likely time for them to repay their debts. Ling Qingzhu's eyes watched the pale-faced skinny young man in the distance. He stood on the crimson furnace while the corners of his mouth contained an azure-like malevolence. Her expression was a little complicated. It seemed that this fellow really intended to turn this Eastern Xian region upside down. Fool that does not know your limits. Not letting a single of my Yuan Gate disciples off. Aren't you afraid of being choked to death by your big words? In the sky, Yuan Kang's expression had become exceptionally terrifying. He stared at Lin Dong in a sinister manner as he sternly shouted. All Yuan Gate disciples, take formation. Yuan Kang lowered his head and roared towards the Yuan Gate disciples below. Understood. Those Yuan Gate disciples hurriedly responded in unison when they heard Yuan Kang. Grim and determined gazes seemed to fill the sky as they looked towards Lin Dong. Subsequently, they quickly began to set up a formation. In an instant, an extremely vast and mighty Yuan power ripple began to unfurl. I shall see just what you can do to us today. Lei Qian stood within the formation. His face was ferocious as he looked at Lin Dong and spoke with a savage smile. Lin Dong, go ahead and be arrogant here. Once we leave Unique Devil region, you should be careful when appearing in Eastern Xian region. Our Yuan Gate experts will be very interested in sparring with you. Dao sect disciples, take formation. At the Dao sect direction, Ying Xiaoxiao suddenly cried out sternly when she saw the situation. Although the enormous formation in the sky was giving off extremely frightening undulations, the Yuan Gate disciples ultimately had the numbers advantage. Moreover, Lin Dong's current condition was not good. They could not simply continue watching at this point in time. The Dao sect disciples immediately responded in unison when they heard Ying Xiaoxiao's cry. They began to build a formation when Lin Dong waved his hand to and fro. Subsequently, a voice was transmitted over, this formation can only rely on my power. Ying Xiaoxiao knitted her umber black brows. Could it be that Lin Dong was planning to rely on his strength alone to fight against all the elite Yuan Gate disciples? Big sis, trust him. Just as Ying Xiaoxiao was about to speak again, Ying Huanhuan pulled her sister's hand and said in a soft voice, "Are you also going to watch him mess around?" Ying Xiaoxiao spoke with anger. "I simply believe in him," Ying Huanhuan smiled and said. Ying Xiaoxiao was taken aback. She glanced at the young lady beside her, before finally sighing helplessly. Perhaps this was all they could do now. From within Lin Dong's light formation, Yuan Kang looked at the formation that the Yuan Gate disciples had built. An ominous glint started to gather in his eyes, while his body slowly descended from the sky into the formation. Subsequently, he lifted his head and stared at Lin Dong with extremely viciousness as he spoke in a malicious voice. "Lin Dong, since you have already spoken, I shall also inform you here that none of your Dao sect disciples will leave this place." "Is that so?" Lin Dong grinned evilly as his body slowly rose into the air. Finally, it entered the enormous light formation. "I do not believe that this damned formation of yours will be able to block the combined attacks of so many disciples from my Yuan Gate." Yuan Kang's hand seal started to change. Immediately, monstrous light burst out from the Yuan Gate disciples' formation below. Majestic Yuan power gathered, before finally fusing into a several thousand feet large Yuan power light lion in the sky. Roar! The light lion roared at the heavens. This roar shook the land, immediately causing the ground to crumble as cracks frantically spread. "Watch how I break this damn formation of yours." Yuan Kang's expression was dark. With a sudden wave of his sleeve, the enormous light lion that had been formed by hundreds of Yuan Gate disciples immediately rushed out explosively. After which, it slammed into the light formation in the sky in front of countless shocked eyes. Its momentum caused one's legs to turn to jelly. Even an initial profound life stage practitioner could only back away from such an attack. Lin Dong looked down from above at the light lion, which was being rapidly magnified in his eyes. Soon after, he breathed in deeply. His slender fingertip flicked, and an ancient stone bead appeared between his fingers. This stone bead was the final gift that the Great Desolate Tablet had given Lin Dong, the Desolation Beads. This thing had never been used by Lin Dong ever since it had landed in his hands. However, he had no choice but to use it today. Lin Dong gazed at the Desolation stone bead in his hand. Soon after, his arm suddenly jerked as the stone bead abruptly shot out, transforming into a flash of grey. The grey flash did not give off an earth-shattering aura. It appeared like the light of a firefly compared to the several thousand feet large light lion. However, it still flew forward without any regret and eventually collided with the lion under the numerous watching gazes. No loud sound appeared at the moment of impact. Everyone could clearly see a monstrous desolation force spread out from the stone bead. Under the erosion of the desolation force, the light lion, which was formed from the Yuan power of all the Yuan Gate disciples, actually started to wither at a shocking speed before finally dissipating. How is this possible? Yuan Kang and the rest watched this strange scene, as their pupils instantly tightened. An expression of disbelief finally appeared on their faces. They could not believe it. An attack that combined the full power of all the Yuan Gate disciples was actually dealt with by Lin Dong in such a bizarre manner. "Be careful." Yuan Kang's expression suddenly changed while he stared at the sky. He had seen a grey flash descending from the sky, and in the end, it landed on the formation above him. Bang! Just as the words, "be careful," escaped from his mouth, cracks swiftly appeared on the stone bead. Next, he could sense a power that borderlined on annihilation erupt from that tiny stone bead like a volcano. Boom! The entire sky seemed to tremble at this moment. The formation created by hundreds of Yuan Gate disciples tottered on the verge of collapse as the destructive force poured downwards. Break! Lin Dong's eyes were ice cold as he stood in the sky. A low voice echoed across the area. Boom! The annihilation-like fluctuation suddenly reached its peak as Lin Dong's voice echoed. Yuan Kang and the rest watched in horror as the cracks started to appear and spread on the formation established by the Yuan Gate disciples. Bang! The cracks spread. In the end, the formation completely exploded in front of countless terrified gazes. The Yuan Gate's final defense had crumbled. A loud earth-shaking noise rang out. The formation that shielded the Yuan Gate disciples exploded with a boom at this moment. Immediately, an extremely berserk energy frantically poured out in torrents. The formation exploded and the berserk energy swept outwards. Having lost their final line of defense, the faces of over 100 of Yuan Gate disciples immediately turned deathly pale as fresh blood was wildly spat out. The entire Yuan Gate camp was in complete disarray. After wreaking havoc for a while, the berserk energy gradually scattered. Countless eyes from the area immediately shot over. After which, they saw that the Yuan Gate camp had been turned upside down. The faces of several of them were filled with extremely horrified expressions. It was a disaster. The hearts of many people violently shivered when they saw this scene. Only then did they completely believe that what Lin Dong had said earlier was true. He was really going to finish off all these Yuan Gate disciples. Such ruthlessness. I am glad I did not offend him. Xue Ling from the Sword Sect felt his scalp turn numb as he watched this scene. His heart repeatedly rejoiced at the fact that he had not forcefully attacked the Dao Sect disciples at the beginning. Lin Dong, I will rip you into 1,000 pieces. Yuan Kang was furious as he observed the damage done to the Yuan Gate disciples. Soon after, he lifted his head and gazed at Lin Dong, who was within the light formation. His roar was filled with a deep bitterness. Beside Yuan Kang, Lei Qian and Ling Zhen were also in a rather sorry state. Their expressions were extremely gloomy as they watched this scene. Furthermore, there was some unconcealable shock under this gloominess. They were truly unable to imagine how Lin Dong was actually able to destroy the formation created by so many Yuan Gate disciples, and still injure them to such an extent all by himself. Lin Dong lowered his head. His eyes were indifferent as he looked at Yuan Kang and the rest. A moment later, a voice that was void of any emotion slowly spread downwards. All the debts that you owe our Dao sect shall be completely collected by myself today. The seal formed by Lin Dong's hands abruptly changed after his words faded. One could see the ancient universe formation rotate in reverse once again as bizarre beams of light took shape at the center of the formation. Bastard, you dare! Yuan Kang sternly shouted. His expression changed when he saw this situation. Lin Dong ignored his shout. With a wave of his sleeve, the many bizarre light beams immediately came sweeping down from all directions. In the end, they shot towards the horrified Yuan Gate disciples from all directions like a grim reaper's scythe. Quickly retreat! Yuan Kang hurriedly cried out when he saw this. However, the Yuan Gate disciples no longer had any way out after having lost the protection of the formation. All they could do was to release their Yuan power and form a protective layer outside their bodies. However, such a defense clearly had no effect against the light beams which contained the power of disintegration. Hence, everyone watched in horror as the Yuan Gate disciples began to disappear one after another when those light beams arrived. The disintegration force contained within the light beams directly erased them from this world. The scene before one's eyes was not one where blood and flesh flew in the air, and there were no screams of misery. There were only figures strangely disappearing one after another. This scene caused one to shudder. Everyone could only look on helplessly as the Yuan Gate disciples disappeared from this world at an astonishing speed. Within a short few minutes, less than half of the Yuan Gate disciples remained. You bastard, my Yuan Gate will not let you off. Lei Qian's eyes were scarlet red as he roared. Does your heart ache? Do you finally understand how it feels? An even more terrifying malevolence gradually surged onto Lin Dong's face as he lowered his head and laughed in a sinister manner. Didn't it feel good when you were killing my Dao sect disciples earlier? Come on, feel good for me now. Yuan Kang's eyes flickered crazily. There was an incomparable bitter resentment gathering within them. However, he quickly breathed in deeply, before he spoke with a stern voice, Lin Dong, we might have gone a little overboard earlier. However, what you are doing now is too much. If this continues, it will be no good for anyone. Why don't we both take a step back in this great sect competition? Your Dao sect has lost many disciples, but my Yuan Gate has also suffered greatly. Why don't we just let this matter rest? Boss. Lei Qian immediately cried out with dissatisfaction when he heard this. Shut up! Yuan Kang suddenly shouted. His eyes were filled with a murderous aura as he stared at Lei Qian. Only then did the latter shut his mouth. This fellow's formation is far too terrifying. We are completely unable to break it. It is unwise to compete with him in ruthlessness at this stage. From the side, Lingzhen spoke in grim voice. Ha ha, you are indeed worthy of being the little Yuan King. Being able to bend according to the circumstances, in the sky, Lin Dong laughed. However, he slowly shook his head. However, do you think that I, Lin Dong, am someone who hesitates when doing something? Lin Dong, if you really force us to that step, you might end up suffering too. Yuan Kang spoke in a grave voice. In that case, let us see just who will suffer in the end. Lin Dong smiled savagely. Since the situation had already reached this stage, it was impossible for him to stop. He was a decisive person to begin with, while Yuan Kang was a ruthless man and also knew how to endure silently. Who could rest and dine in peace when such an enemy remained at large? You asked for it. Yuan Kang had also been completely enraged by Lin Dong. His eyes were dark and stern as he looked towards Lingzhen and Lei Qian, and spoke in a grave voice, attack together. The Yuan power in that brat's body is already exhausted. He will not last much longer. Yes? Upon hearing this, the Lingzhen duo also nodded with cruelness in their eyes. All remaining Yuan Gate disciples, abandon your defenses and launch an offensive formation. From the situation earlier, it seemed that the strange light beams possessed the power of annihilation. An ordinary disciple was practically unable to block it. In that case, they might as well risk their lives and attack. Yes? Although those Yuan Gate disciples had frightened faces, they were also aware that it was pointless to say anything now that they had been pushed to such a stage. Deep within their hearts, however, they were vaguely regretting pushing the Dao sect disciples so far. If it were not for that, Lin Dong might not become so crazy. The figures of the Yuan Kang trio rushed out almost simultaneously. Majestic Yuan power whizzed out, and the trio displayed their strongest martial arts. Yuan God Codex, world returning to the Yuan. Spirit God Codex, spiritual vein calamity finger. Thunder God Codex, thunder demon prison. Rumble. The monstrous Yuan power showed some traces of being somewhat crazy at this moment. The trio had all pushed their strengths to the limit. Frightening attacks that caused one to have difficulty breathing flew towards Lin Dong. Behind them, numerous Yuan Gate disciples also unleashed their strongest attacks, which frantically unfurled towards the light formation. This desperate attack appeared to cause the land to tremble. Lin Dong watched this scene as scarlet red surged out in his eyes. In the next moment, he raised his head and heartily laughed at the heavens. Both of his hands spread outwards as threads of blood shot out from the pores all over his body, causing him to instantly transform into a bloody figure, while his body also shrunk a size. If you wish to struggle with your lives on the line, I shall accompany all of you too. Threads of blood shot out. Finally, they were rapidly absorbed by the light formation. Immediately, the entire large formation suddenly gained a faint scarlet red color. Subsequently, the formation began to rumble as it rotated. Bizarre light beams that contained the power of disintegration once again shot out from the formation, and the Yuan Gate disciples below started to swiftly disappear at an astonishing speed. While the Yuan Kang trio's attacks were continuously disintegrated and dissipated, they forcibly relied on their majestic Yuan power that had merged together to withstand the disintegration. Subsequently, they swiftly approached Lin Dong, who was within the light formation. They could sense that the current Lin Dong was truly at his limit. Perhaps all they needed was a light attack and they would be able to kill him. Bastard, your good days are over. Once we finish you off, I will send all those Dao sect disciples to accompany you in the underworld. Lei Qian's expression was savage as his roar rumbled across the sky. Under the watch of countless unblinking gazes, the Yuan Kang trio steadily neared Lin Dong. Everyone held their breath at this moment. They knew that the final outcome would be determined in one go. Lin Dong, whose body was drenched in fresh blood, forcefully opened his eyes. He watched the trio rushing over with faces filled with malice. A slight arc slowly lifted on his face that was now so bloody that it looked rather terrifying. Soon after, both of his hands formed a series of strange seals as a soft cry was emitted from within his mouth. Halt! A mysterious undulation swiftly rippled outwards in a circular manner. After which, the Yuan Kang trio's charging figures were momentarily stilled. At that very instant, an extremely thick light beam suddenly rushed out from behind Lin Dong's body the moment those three stilled. Finally, it ruthlessly bombarded their bodies before their horrified eyes. It's over. When the light beam bombarded the trio's bodies, Lin Dong's exceptionally hoarse and weak voice quietly reverberated across the entire area. The resplendent bizarre light beam swept across the horizon and smashed into the Yuan Kang trio's bodies under uncountable watching gazes. Everyone seemed to see a terrified expression appearing on the faces of the trio at the moment of impact. The Yuan Kang trio's gaze pierced through the resplendent light beam and stared unwaveringly at the skinny figure that was only a dozen feet away. In their eyes, there was fear, and also dissatisfaction. Moreover, there was also some disbelief. Even at this time, they were still unable to believe that all their Yuan Gate elite disciples would actually be annihilated by a single person, Lin Dong. Yuan Gate disciples, complete annihilation. Such ruthlessness had surpassed even the Dao sect's Ju Tong from back then. The trio's gazes intertwined at the very last moment. All of them saw regret in each other's eyes. If they knew beforehand that Lin Dong would be this savage, they would not have pressed the Dao sect so hard. Who could imagine that this seemingly good-natured fellow would actually be this frightening when he went crazy? A miscalculation. A voice that was filled with dissatisfaction slowly echoed. Quickly after, the sight before the trio's eyes quickly turned to darkness, as their bodies also rapidly disappeared under the disintegration light beams. The incomparably large formation in the sky began to tremble as it faded. Finally, the bright light completely scattered, along with the bodies of the Yuan Gate's three little kings. This entire place became completely silent as everyone gazed at the now empty space. No one dared to breathe too loudly at this moment. Their eyes were dull as they looked in the direction where the Yuan Gate disciples had been. Of the huge black mass of people that were originally there, none were left. There were 537 Yuan Gate disciples. Plus the Yuan Kang trio, their numbers made up 540. Yet, at this moment, none of them had survived. They were completely annihilated. Although the rocky ground was currently not littered with corpses, nor did blood flow like rivers, everyone could still sense a chill spreading out from this place. This chill entered from the bottom of their feet and charged directly towards their heads. This person was too ruthless. Many gazes gathered towards the blood-soaked figure in the sky, and their scalps could not help but feel somewhat numb. The great sect competition had been held many times. Although a great battle would occur during each competition, there was not a single instance where all the elite disciples of a sect were completely exterminated. Not only did this require extreme ruthlessness, but it also required an extremely frightening strength. Such strength had not been achieved by even the exceptional genius from the Dao sect, Ju Tong, when he had participated in the great sect competition back then. Now, however, it had been accomplished by Lin Dong. This time around, Yuan Gate will truly go crazy. Wu Kun breathed in deeply, suppressing the great shock in his heart. His complexion was currently a little pale. Clearly, he had been frightened by Lin Dong's tactics. Upon hearing this, the surrounding 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples deeply nodded in agreement. Those who could participate in the great sect competition were basically elite disciples. Yet, all of these disciples were now lost. It was likely that Yuan Gate would feel great pain even with their foundation. The great sect competition is originally not meant for sparing. Instead, it is a life and death experience. Any incident that occurs within it is fair. In past great sect competitions, the losses suffered by the Dao sect disciples were also quite severe. The last competition, even that great senior sister of the Sky Hall was surrounded and killed by the Yuan Gate disciples. The reason these Yuan Gate disciples act in such a domineering manner is also because they could rely on the rules of the competition, hence causing the furious Dao sect to have no choice but to grit their teeth and swallow their anger. Ling Qingzhu softly continued, however, it is likely that Yuan Gate will never have imagined that they would completely repay all their past debts this time around. From today onwards, perhaps the name of the strongest amongst the younger generation of the Eastern Xian region will belong to Lin Dong. Wu Kun sighed and nodded. He knew that those who had witnessed this desperate great battle today would no longer dare to have any intention of challenging Lin Dong. The number one amongst the younger generation was indeed a deserving title. However, although it is perfectly reasonable for Lin Dong to be so ruthless due to the rules of the competition, it is likely that, given their style, Yuan Gate will not take this lying down. This matter is not considered over. Ling Qingzhu muttered to herself. After which, she had a complicated look in her eyes as she looked towards the figure in the sky, whose entire body was giving off desperation. This person truly intended to turn the Eastern Xian region upside down. The light in the sky finally disappeared completely, while Lin Dong's body staggered a little. Weakness and fatigue that could not be described frantically spread out from his limbs and bones, causing his vision to start turning black. Lin Dong suddenly heard a buzzing sound from the sky to his front while his vision was gradually turning dim. He weakly blinked his eyes, only to see an emblem flickering with light suspended at that spot. Waves of extremely majestic ripples were being emitted while the light flickered. Spirit emblem? Lin Dong gazed at the emblem that contained an extremely majestic energy. His weak spirit violently trembled. This spirit emblem was evidently left behind by Yuan Kang. The disintegration power had turned Yuan Kang into nothingness, yet this spirit emblem had been left behind. Lin Dong's astonishment only lasted for a split second. Subsequently, he abruptly extended his hand abruptly and grabbed the spirit emblem. Of course, his speed might be quick, but it was still seen by many people. Surprisingly, however, those present were actually unable to summon even the slightest courage to snatch the spirit emblem, despite being faced with such a rare and unique treasure. It was clear that Lin Dong's previous display still lingered in their eyes. Lin Dong's strength seemed to have become completely spent after the spirit emblem entered his hand. The sight before his eyes swiftly started to turn black, as his body directly fell towards the ground. From the looks of it, he was at his weakest. Ying Huan's lovely body moved when she saw the situation from the ground. She hurried into the air and supported Lin Dong, who was so weak that he was about to faint. She gazed at that dried-up figure of Lin Dong that was dyed red by blood, as her large eyes involuntarily turned red. Her long and beautiful hand contained some iciness as it wiped at the blood on Lin Dong's face. With red eyes, she said, "You are really too reckless." "Ha ha. I have promised sect leader to protect all of you, however, we have still lost so many seniors and juniors." Lin Dong's body was practically completely leaning on the gentle and soft figure of the young lady as he mumbled with closed eyes. "Wait for me to wake up before leaving the unique devil region." Before he completely lost consciousness, Lin Dong's weak voice transmitted into Ying Huan's ears. After which, his mind fully descended into darkness. "Idiot, you have already done very well." Ying Huan looked at the young face that was filled with fatigue. Those large eyes of hers flashed with an exceptionally gentle expression. She quickly carried Lin Dong and slowly landed from the sky. Soon after, the Dao sect disciples came surging over like floodwaters. Wang Yang watched the Dao sect disciples rush over in an almost crazy manner as he shook his head. That usually emotionless face of his currently possessed an extremely ugly smile. This fellow is truly terrifying. The Yuan Gate disciples had been completely annihilated. This clearly caused Wang Yang to feel extremely joyous. Every great sect competition, the Dao sect disciples would suffer great losses after being pressed by the Yuan Gate disciples. They had held back this anger for so many years. Now, however, they had managed to take revenge. "Senior Sister Xiao, what should we do now?" Qingyi gazed at the unconscious Lin Dong, before looking towards Ying Xiao as he asked. This great sect competition had finally come to a close. This spot was quite close to the teleporting formation. If they wished, they would be able to leave this place within a day. However, leaving might be easy, but once they left the unique devil region, All of them were aware that the entire Eastern Xian region would likely fall into an uproar because of this incident. The oncoming storm was even more frightening than the battle here. Ying Xiaoxiao knitted her brows. She was similarly aware of the commotion that would be stirred when word of this matter spread. However, this was unavoidable. Lin Dong said to wait for him to awaken before leaving the unique devil region. By the side, Ying Huan softly stated. Ying Xiaoxiao pondered for a moment after hearing this. She subsequently nodded. It seemed that Lin Dong was also clearly aware of just what a frightening thing he had done. Once this matter spread, Yuan Gate would definitely go crazy. Although he had the rules of the Great Sect competition as protection, no one could guarantee that Yuan Gate would not take any action. Hence, Lin Dong must be awake when he left the unique devil region. Moreover, he also needed to have recovered his fighting strength. All disciples, stay and rest here. We will wait for Lin Dong to awaken. Ying Xiaoxiao was also decisive. She immediately issued her order. None of the numerous Dao sect disciples had any objections when they heard this. After which, the huge group sat on the ground, forming a circular shape that protected Lin Dong in the middle. It seems that the Dao sect disciples do not plan to leave immediately, Wu Kun commented when he saw this. This is because they will face an even greater storm once they leave the unique devil region. Lin Dong has an extremely cautious character. He will definitely not allow himself to be in such a dangerous situation while in a weakened state. Ling Qingzhu hesitated for a moment. After which, she beckoned with her hand and a jade bottle appeared within it. This jade bottle subsequently turned into a ray of light that shot towards the distant Ying Xiaoxiao. Ying Xiaoxiao received the jade bottle and was slightly startled. She lifted her head and looked at the far-off Ling Qingzhu. This is the clear jade saliva of the Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace. It will be of some use to his injuries. Ling Qingzhu's faint voice was transmitted over from a distance. Thank you. Ying Xiaoxiao clearly did not expect that Ling Qingzhu would actually take the initiative to lend a hand. However, she did not reject the offer. After keeping the jade bottle, she nodded towards Ling Qingzhu and thanked her. All of you, tell him to be careful when he leaves the unique devil region. Ling Qingzhu softly said. Without further ado, she turned around and led the large group of Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples to fly away. After the Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples left, the remaining super sects also began to leave. One could imagine that they would bring news of this out, and in the end, it would shake the entire Eastern Xian region. This video will end here.